Welcome to another episode of the Prep Coach Podcast, episode 2 for 2026. And the first episode...
Already a man down.
Already a man down. MG's not here. He had something else going on, also we are recording this one day later than what we normally record it, so we had to move things around a little bit, but that's okay. We're just going to pump through questions, unless you have anything to update on or anything to...
Nah, bro, let's let it rip.
We didn't get a chance last episode to go through many questions, so we'll start with that. All right, let's go. What behaviors affect progress when training and nutrition look good? So what can affect progress outside of training and nutrition? I think we've already said what the biggest thing is other than that, which is sleep. For me, it's like sleep is going to affect your progress the most.
Yeah,
like sure. If your nutrition's good, your training's good, you've got a good program, you're recovering well, all that kind of stuff's really, really good. From like how much volume is in your program and the movement patterns that are in your program and things like that, and nutrition's good and you're on enough food for whatever your goal is and your timing of your nutrition is good, the next thing I would look for is sleep. Actually, I'd probably look for sleep before even those, but sure. If you're to look for anything else, it'd be sleep. Is there anything else, because we both agree on that, is there anything else? Would you look at like supplementation if you're not progressing? Would you look at...
Yeah, you could potentially lean into, things like caffeine and stuff like beta-alanine for physique athletes. It's not really going to make... Everyone talks about that in terms of they associate beta-alanine with that paresthesia effect that you get in terms of the tingling. But in reality, that's there for... It's more of an endurance supplement. You use that for, a cyclist or for a runner who's looking at sustaining, high workloads for lengthy periods of time. So really outside of caffeine as an ergogenic aid, there's not really that much more that's going to give you, much more bang for your buck. I would say maybe just more leaning into arousal levels. So, leaning into, the sympathetic branch of your autonomic nervous system around training. So, going into a session, like let's say you and I are both pretty calm, relaxed, chilled individuals, but when there comes to, you might have a heavy, you could be deadlifting 240 kilos, or you're going to squat a heavy amount. You can't just have a conversation, well, at least I can't, and then just walk up to it and just go and pull it for 3 or 4 reps and carry on. Usually listening to certain music to heighten arousal levels, pacing up and down. I think that becomes even more important at the back end. But I think that mentality around locking in versus you could be training with a mate, you're having a chat, you're laughing, and maybe that can cost you versus if you're at a state where, like, you might be thinking, if I don't get 6 reps on this, like something bad's that's how my mind goes sometimes. Something bad's going to happen. I need to find that will. And so you have to cross over to that state. And I think that can make a difference. I think maybe the other one is even just enjoyment and satisfaction. If someone's maybe a bit more down in the dumps, that could potentially have an effect on the desire to want to do something. Maybe motivation is low. And that's why we always say that good athletes are able to, get things done even when motivation's lacks. That's the difference between good and great. The desire to and your goal has to supersede short-term discomfort and short-term, lacks of motivation, because everyone gets that. We're human. But outside of that, I think that's probably it. Sleep's probably the main driver, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, the psychological element would play a part too.
I think one thing about motivation and enjoying the process, even though some parts aren't enjoyable, but I was talking to a client actually recently and talking about how also the plan and the coaching needs to make sure that this whole process is sustainable and at least somewhat enjoyable, if that makes sense. And I think specifically I was talking in the context of the improvement season, because that's normally the longest phase you do.
For sure.
And it's not very sexy. It's pretty boring, right? You're not seeing big changes in the mirror. You're not getting shredded, all that kind of stuff. So sometimes motivation can be down. So, and also sometimes people can feel like I'm just churning through this process and I just can't be bothered just tracking all my food all the time and just I can't see myself doing this for the next 6 or 12 months. And sometimes from a coach perspective, you need to see if there's those red flags that come up and then maybe give them maybe some flexibility, or just maybe tell them that, it's okay if you're feeling the way you're feeling. It's pretty normal. Maybe for this week, back things off a little bit. Maybe don't train 5 days, do 4 instead. Try to get the enjoyment back into the process a little bit more. So I think that's also really important. But you mentioned it, so I thought I'd bring it up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, all of those things are kind of they're intertwined. But yeah, in the context of the improvement season, I mean, you think about your bodybuilding journey. Let's say that you bodybuild for 10 years, and let's say that you do 3 shows in that time point. You're talking about, say that an average prep is 6 months. You're talking about 18 months out of 10 years. So when you
Yeah.
compartmentalize, yeah, there's some recovery, but a large portion of that is allocated to the improvement period. So I think when you're in contest prep, like prep is usually going to be at the forefront, but when you're in the improvement season, you need to make your bodybuilding fit your lifestyle, because if it's not sustainable and it's not enjoyable, then why are we doing it? Because it is something that we allocate time to get organized. Some people can track everything to the absolute letter. And to be honest, I used to be like that in the improvement season, and ever since having kids, I couldn't tell you the last time I tracked a whole day's worth of food, mainly because it's the same thing virtually every day. But it's
Yeah.
like one of my kids doesn't finish their dinner, and I'm like, I'll just finish it, I'll eat it. If I'm
Yeah.
dieting, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, of course
And
you
it's a
would.
different story. But
Yeah.
I think you have to be able to, rather than having sort of fixed boundaries, rather thinking of them as though, like I use the term the bandwidth all the time. So as long as you're roughly within this range, even someone that could be dieting, you might say, they're eating 2,500 calories, right? That's their maintenance. Rather than say you have to diet on 1,700, flexibility is important to them. I've got someone at the moment who's in that camp, and I'm like, we're going to set a range, 1,700 to say 2,000 in this dieting period. She's not in a hurry to get it off. I'm like, so if there's some days where you're feeling good and like you can dig a bit more, then dig a bit more and go lower. And then you might have a dinner where you want to partake and you might want to have a glass of wine. Maybe you're going to have 2,000 or a little bit over that. But when we look at the net energy balance over the week, it's going to be down on where it was. And so as long as that's happening, it may not be directly like that. It may be like that, but it's trending down.
Yeah.
Then that's okay. If it means that that individual is enjoying it, and it's sustainable. When it's in contest prep, it's different, but I feel like that's a very isolated,
Yeah.
scenario.
Yeah, as long as you keep the needle moving in the direction that you want,
Yeah,
at
for
the
sure.
rate that you want. If there's fluctuation on the way there, then that's perfectly fine. But as long as things are progressing in that direction, in the rate you want, then that's the art of coaching, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What does it actually mean to train with intent rather than just structure? The way I read this question is, when you set a training program for a client and you go through the reason why we're doing this exercise is because you have this weakness here. The reason why we do that one is because you have this weak. So there's intent behind the programming then other than just following the program blindly. Maybe you train well, maybe you train with intensity, but I think having some intent behind what you're doing helps with motivation as well.
100%.
Because you go in the gym and you're like, okay, that I need to work this area of my physique, and that exercise does that. So now I'm motivated to really crush that exercise. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think when you have weaknesses, like let's say, let's use a female for example. Let's say that you have a client who comes to you and you do an analysis and you're like, your glutes are lacking lacking size. We need bigger glutes in general. We need upper glutes, lower glutes, and so you're programming a ton of glute work in there. Now, if this individual knows that and she's, I really want to compete, and Michael said to me that if I can bring up my glutes, then maybe 2027 is an option. I guarantee every time they're going to train glutes, they're focusing on that muscle mind connection. They're making sure if they're doing something unilateral, they've got a vertical shin, they're biasing, they're trying to be as intentional about isolating that specific region of the body and obviously mastering that exercise. Versus if I had a guy who I'm like, we're going to put in maybe 6 sets of hip thrusts just so that we get some decent glute tissue. So when we get you shredded, you can see your glutes. When they're in the gym, maybe they're thinking about it, maybe they're not. But I guarantee you, if I said to, arms are a real weakness, and then on arm day, they're making sure that it's their favorite day of the week. So
Yeah.
that's the best example, that there's buy-in, but there's rationale. And that's programming 101. There should always be a reason behind why you're doing what you're doing, and not to just, necessarily, I'm trying to target the lats here. I'm trying to target them because on your physique, you lack this, and this is what we need to make you better.
Yeah. Actually going to bring up a question. So I had a client ask me, when I train upper body, I feel like I'm training with intensity, but when I train lower body, I feel like I'm giving the same intensity, but I'm more out of breath, I'm sweatier. Whereas for upper body, I don't get sweaty, I don't get much out of breath. So am I training hard enough for upper body? They said, I'm training to failure on my sets. And I said, you know what? I've never been asked that question where someone says, I don't get as sweaty. I don't feel like I'm training hard enough, even though I'm training to failure on those exercises. And I said, when we say train with intensity, sometimes people can think, is it intensity mean like gritting my teeth and yelling and screaming?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, or getting as sweaty as possible or out of breath as possible. It actually doesn't mean that. It actually means training as close as you can to failure, training as hard as you can. And we just call that as training intensely.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see it any other way?
No, I agree. I think if you, so just to tease out some of those things, your client using the words, I'm not as sweaty, my heart rate's not as high. So if we think about sweating is your body's mechanism of cooling because, your temperature is elevating and it's getting hotter because your muscles are having to work harder, you're generating more heat, it's a way of cooling you down. In terms of an increase in respiratory rate, so if you're breathing a lot heavily, your heart's having to pump more oxygen around to tissue, to your muscles that need more. And if you think about tissue, as in if I'm doing a bench press and I'm training my chest, my shoulders, my tris, versus if I'm performing a deadlift. If I do 10 repetitions of a Smith machine incline bench press and I train to failure in the last rep, the cadence slows and it's a grind and my chest is burning, versus if I do a 10 repetition set on deadlifts, my heart rate will be like 180. Afterwards, I'm in oxygen depth for like 4 minutes because your body's just trying to recover because it's so much more systemically and peripherally demanding. So the requirement for your heart to beat greater is there. You're going to get an increase in body heat. So when you look at it objectively like that, that absolutely makes sense. If you're talking about, even if it's not a deadlift, if it was any kind of axial loaded movements that place a lot more systemic fatigue, a lot more energetically taxing, are going to have more of that carryover. So I think it's in the same context that I'm sure if you were training a back and push session, you weren't doing any arms versus you compared how much sweatier or how hot you get, your breath rate versus if you just train bis and tris, you're probably not going to get overly sweaty training biceps and triceps.
Yeah.
So,
but you still train with intensity
for sure
on those movements if you went to failure and you pushed as hard as you possibly
But if you
could.
think about bis and tris, they're a smaller muscle compared to your chest or to your back.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of back training, if you're training back, not to say if you're training back with intent and intensity and it's there and you're moving decent load, I would liken that you're probably going to get similar kind of fatigue. And I know if I'm training pull, I'll be a lot sweatier. Anterior push sessions aren't usually going to be as, I don't think, as demanding as say a big pull session or anything that's lower body based. That's just based on the size of the tissue and the demands and the energy demands. So I wouldn't get caught up or assess the quality of your training based on how much you're sweating or your heart rate zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. When do athletes waste the most effort across a training year without realizing it? So where do they waste the most amount of effort? We covered intensity. We covered following the program as it's written. Consistency is important.
Are we talking about a specific time point within the year or at what stages? Are we talking about, do they say anything more on?
Nah, it just says, where do athletes waste the most effort across a training year without realizing?
I mean, one way you could waste it is by not training, is in if you're someone that periodically employs deloads or devolumes every 6 to 8 weeks, as opposed to auto-regulating it when you actually need it. If you're someone that, periodically you deload every 6 or 8 weeks, that's roughly 8 sessions within your year that you're not training. So when you tease that out, it's a decent portion of your year. It's between 15 and 20% that you could be getting better. But I think it's just so individualized. Like there'll be some people who might go through periods of motivation where they'll train 3 or 4 times a week, and then they might go to a bodybuilding comp in September and they're motivated and they're training 6 days a week for the next month, and then they go overseas. Or for me, there's no real like blanket statement of what would fall under that banner. The only thing I'd say is maybe I think when if I was to go into most gyms, and even being up in the Gold Coast the other week, seeing just in my rest periods, my perception of looking at other people that are training, I might do 3 sets in a space that someone has done a set and they're still just sat there sitting on their phone. I think being on your phone is one of the worst things that you can do when you're in the gym, because with social media, text messages, it's just easier to lose focus.
But
Other than that, I'm not too sure, to be honest. There's nothing really that jumps out off the page to me. What about you?
I was just going to say just consistency, effort, intensity. Links into this next question that we're going to go to in a second, but also swapping and changing things a little bit too often.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
good one.
yeah. Because the next question that we got here was, what's the cost of always choosing exercises that you're good at? So I've had some athletes that I'll give them an exercise and they're like, I don't like it, I'm not good at it. I'm like, well, that's what should be motivating you to do the exercise so you can get good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, if they've got like an imbalance or something like that. I'm like, they're like, oh, I can hold a dumbbell on my left side, but then when I do it on my right leg, I can't hold the dumbbell.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to do body weight. I was like, that's fucking great.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, we know that there's an imbalance there. Let's
We
work on
yeah,
that.
we
And
need
also,
to attenuate.
it's motivating to see yourself get stronger every week and get better every week. It may be crap now when you're crap at it, when you're shit at it, but you shouldn't avoid exercises that you're not good at.
I think just as people, as humans, no one likes to do things that they're not very good at. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, this is going to be so hard. I'm not going to do it. Versus get me to do a glute drive because I'm awesome at that and I can excel at that. But if you and most of the time they're not good at it would imply that maybe they're not very strong in that particular movement or that particular plane.
Yeah.
And so the whole point of that, the rationale behind why that is there is to try and attenuate that so that you can get good at it. And as a result of you getting good at that, that might be there as an accessory that's going to give you carryover towards this, and this exercise. So I think, sometimes it means, again, doing the things that maybe you don't necessarily always want to. They're the things that you need to be doing. Again, not everyone wants to do stuff that they don't enjoy, but that's part and parcel. And I think there's something rewarding around maybe doing something that you don't enjoy necessarily doing, but offers high yield, and the return on investment is very, very good.
Yeah.
You could say, who likes cleaning their house? Well, I enjoy I enjoy that purely based on the feeling that I get afterwards when it's done,
Yeah.
how clean it is, the reward that you get from that.
Yeah. But maybe the job of actually physically cleaning, you're like, oh, this is not super fun, like wiping the dust off of this. But after it's done, it's rewarding. So that's the fun part, right? So I guess I get what you mean. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's a bit different. Maybe we're a little bit
Yeah,
OCD in the sense that we actually like wiping dust. But
Yeah.
anyways.
find it quite cathartic.
So on that, I want to expand because normally commonly people say they're not good at something when it requires like balance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you give someone a single leg exercise where they've got to use balance and stability. Do you think that it's actually good to try to have good balance in general in your exercises,
100%.
but also does it actually help with muscle growth as well? Like, what I'm saying is, people talk about stabilizing muscles and getting stabilizers. If you get your stabilizers jacked, are you actually going to see it in your physique?
Potentially, there's a lot of research that shows that utilizing, say, isometrics. Everyone knows I've been a big advocate. I remember when I put something up a little while ago on my story about one of my athletes doing isometrics and how I feel like they're a very, very unutilized training methodology, mainly because of the effect that it has on connective tissue, but also there is still some really good research around the benefits from a hypertrophic standpoint. Again, if you think about throwing something that's different, you might have someone that's hit a plateau on lots of different exercises. You employ a different cadence or an isometric and you see a different return on investment. But when we're talking about getting stronger, let's say that it's a squat, right? And that you have really, really poor stability on one of your knees because your glutes weak or maybe whatever it is, or you're weaker through your quadriceps. And so if you just ignore that, you're always going to be compromised when you're squatting because it's a bilateral movement.
Potentially get injured?
Yeah.
Potentially get injured, yeah.
There's a very strong case you'll get injured. And that's another reason why we do it as a preventative reason. But if you are really, really strong at performing, it doesn't even have to be an isometric, anything that's balance oriented, there's going to be some carryover. Obviously, the key is to design that balance, in whatever context it is, to try and make it so that it's specific to whatever you're trying to improve on. And that's why you see so many team and field-based athletes employ static and dynamic types of balance so that when they're in compromised positions, they're able to be able to get out of them and to not get injured. But from a preventative reason, if you lack mobility or if you lack balance, it's not a matter of, will I get injured? It's just a matter of really of when.
The only exercises that I would put in that require a lot of balance would be like a single leg deadlift, right? With like a dumbbell, or you can even use a barbell if you really wanted to, and even like a single leg hip thrust. So,
Or a step down.
or a step down or a step up.
Mm-hmm.
So they're probably the things that require, that I would put in the exercise that people say require a bit of balance. Now, obviously, those exercises actually work tissue that you can visibly see,
Mm-hmm.
but also as well, they help with the carryover into an exercise where you're using both legs
Mm-hmm.
or both arms as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, another reason I program a lot of even just unilateral wall sits, and I do them a lot for myself. It helped a lot with tendinopathy. But if you, especially with females, we tend to employ a lot of unilateral based exercise. Could be a single leg press, any kind of split squat if it's front foot elevated. And so if you don't have that stability, and usually a lot of the times one of the limiting factors for progression will be there'll be an asymmetry. So on my right leg,
Yes.
I can pound through that, but my left leg, I can't. So I'm stagnated on X amount of load. You're not going to increase and keep loading the bar up. You can get it on one leg, be counting the other. Whereas if you were to strengthen the weaker limb, and again, you were to improve stability and improve balance, you can guarantee that there's going to be some carryover to being able to then execute that exercise better.
Yeah. Also, too, is, bodybuilding, we look at symmetry and proportion as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, let's just call it from a female, they're in their back pose.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see if one glute is slightly bigger than the other. Maybe one has a deeper tie in than the other one does.
Sure.
And that could be the factor where, okay, that one gets second, that one gets first.
Yep.
So
100%.
sometimes I employ those things where, and sometimes you don't know that because you get someone shredded and you're like, there's actually an imbalance there.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually, like, their lower glute there is actually not as, hasn't have as much tissue as the left or the right side. So
Mm-hmm.
then in the improvement cell, we're like, okay, we need to do a lot more single leg work
stuff.
in that
Yeah.
area there.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, how do athletes rebuild trust in the process after a disappointing season? I know whenever I talk to athletes, I want to make sure that they have the most enjoyable experience they possibly can so that they're in the sport for the longevity of it. They're not like a one-hit wonder where they're just doing a comp just to tick off a buck. Look, there's some people are, but for me, in my team, very, 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 very rarely
Really,
that
yeah.
I have those kind of people. So I want to make sure that the experience is as enjoyable as possible. So I don't want to see them compete once. I want to see them compete multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
But when you classify disappointing season, I'm assuming it's more so based on placing than based on your look. Like if you have a really good coach that can get you in shape and put you on stage looking your absolute best, the only thing that could be disappointing is you're not getting the placing that you wanted, or maybe you did something in the prep where you didn't give it your absolute all.
Yeah. I think they're probably the main, the placing. Everyone wants to win, but in reality, you're only going to have one winner. You're only going to have, if it's at a national show, you're going to have one person who wins the overall, one person who wins the pro card, unless they're fortunate enough to go on a pro lineup and get it that way. But if you're looking at it on the markers, and that's why I think it's important at the start of your prep, at the end of the season, if we were to sit down and have a conversation, so let's say I'm doing 26 season C, what is it that's going to make me feel fulfilled? What is it that I want to get out of this season? It's like, I want to win a pro card and I want to be the world champion. All right, cool. Well, we don't necessarily have control over that because it's objective. We never know what the head judge is going to say. We may get rewarded. We may be the best we've ever been. And in the coach's eyes, you may be the best on stage, but the placing doesn't reflect that. Are you then going to be like it was a failure because someone else didn't deem us to be the best? No, if you are presenting something that's better than the last time, the look is better, we nailed everything, you had a great prep, would you be happy with that? All right, cool. So, and you're literally going through, I want to be able to get through, if I can say that I can get through prep and I don't miss any family events, I still show up for my family. It can be whatever you like. It's relevant to the individual. But I think before you start prep, if you were to fast forward and think about at the end of the season, what is it that I really what am I going to feel good about?
Mm-hmm.
And placing, that's a no-brainer. Every single person is going to say that. No one competes to come last.
Yeah.
Some people genuinely just do compete for the sake of it. We all want to win. All right, cool. We've said that. But what else aside from that? Because we have no control over that. All we can control is what we can get after. But if it could be something like you said, if you deviated, you didn't prioritize sleep, you stayed up later, you missed a couple of workouts, you didn't really give everything to your cardio. Maybe, there was a couple of times there where you did pick at a bit of this and a bit of that. You know, is that going to keep you up at night? I know for me personally, it would. I know some athletes who could probably give, two shits equally. They're not serious about the sport. But I think majority of the people, at least that we would work with, they're not in that camp. And if they're going to do something, that they're all in. But I think it's important to have some goals that are outside the scope of placings, because you have no control over that.
Yeah. Do you ever have a conversation with athletes before a prep starts and set an expectation on how they could get beaten? So what is their weakness, and they know it going in, and potentially that's the reason why someone might beat them? Like, do you ever say, look, we're going in, we've tried our absolute best, we've been in the improvement season, we've done everything we needed to do, we decided we want to cash in our chips and we want to do a prep now, but potentially someone could have bigger chest than you, and that could be the limiting factor, or someone could have a wider back than you, or better glutes than you, or whatever that may be. Do you ever, or you're a little bit on the smaller on the stature side, someone could come in, just out muscle you, and there's only years and years and years of training, and you never doing a prep and just spending years of improvement, is you ever going to be able to meet that level? Like, do you ever have those kind of conversations?
More around whether we're going to do this season or that one. So I might be like, I would rather we take another 6 months, because I reckon one of the areas is this. Like I had a new athlete I started working with sort of toward maybe like October last year, wanted to do this year, and he's going to do classic physique. And I was like, there's no way that you're doing next year. And I'll tell you why. Go through all those things. All right, cool. What do you reckon about season 8? In order for you to do that, just to paint a picture for you, like showing some photos, this is what, and this, he's got a good physique, but wants, like everyone, he wants to
Wants to
win
win.
pro card. Yeah.
Okay, pro card, yeah.
This is the standard. To get to that, this is the level of, we need to go further than that conditioning wise. If you were to stand next to that person right now, you may have tissue here and here, but you're going to get smoked there, and there. In reality, to do that, we need at least 18 months to acquire that tissue. You also need to learn. I know that you think that you train hard now, but I guarantee you there's levels, and we're gonna explore that from a nutritional perspective, from a sleep perspective, all the things you put down. 6 to 7 hours a night for me, not good enough. You need to be sleeping 8 hours a night. If you're serious about you want to be the number one person in the country, 6-7 hours is not going to cut it. The people that are doing those things, they're leaving no stone unturned. So it's amazing what you can achieve in an 18-month to 2 year period if you are relentless in the pursuit to be better. And I'm not just talking about how hard you train, consistency with food, not consuming alcohol. The sleep's obviously a big part of it. The training intensity, just every single day, you're ending the day with a deposit, not with withdrawals. And if you do that over time, it compounds. So it's that conversation usually unfolds there, unless you might have an athlete that has placed, and it's happened to me before, placing second to the same person. Like, for this show, they have you covered here and here. This is what I think we need to do. We have to play this card. But we have to be willing to accept that it may be rewarded, it may not be rewarded.
Yeah, okay.
And I feel like that happens a lot. Maybe a little bit more on the assisted side, where you see some guys come in fuller or come in sharper. But I think it's important that you have to manage expectations. And I'm probably a little bit more on the, similar to you, pretty brutal with, I don't give out praise like candy canes. For me, it's something that you manage. Not to say that you don't ever give it, but also you need to manage expectations. Because if I might see someone and I'm like, this person's going to be a pro champ, like, you just know that they're elite. I'm not going to tell them that, because if anything, I'm going to be like, these are our weaknesses, and I'm going to press on those, because it's my job to make you better.
Yeah.
Not to blow smoke up your ass. Otherwise, you can just find someone else to be a cheerleader coach.
Yeah, of course.
Like, that's not going to be, if you want to get better, we're going to push you to get to that point. Because if you don't, and we've seen it, we've had athletes that you would think, like, how did that not go that way? But it's subjective.
Yeah.
It's not like I finished the race first, therefore I won. Like, you've got other people's opinions. You like apples or oranges?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think the only other missing piece I wanted to talk about was, as I said before, is you could be in improvement season forever, because you'll never be perfect.
For sure.
You'll never have big enough arms, big enough glutes, big enough whatever. That's the coming point in time where you got to cash in chips.
Yeah, of course.
And do a prep. Do you ever do that with the client knowing that there's still a gap there, because they're never going to be perfect.
For sure, because there's some people that just don't have that you could do everything right, and they may have improved, but their rate of improvement may be they could have their legs have grown out of sight, and you're trying to add more tissue to the chest. They've definitely grown through there, but it's still not bulletproof, and it's probably their weakest body part. But they've spent 3 years building it. It's stronger than it was, but you just got to roll the dice. We're gonna say at some point we've got to press play. This is we may get hurt in this shot, but we're gonna count on winning this shot and this shot and this shot here. So.
All right, we'll finish on this one. What questions should athlete ask themselves before deciding to compete this year? I think we just kind of covered that bit. It's really knowing whether you should compete this year or whether you need more time. And I know I had a chat with an athlete recently, and we assessed their physique, and I said, for you to fill in those gaps that you need to reach the goal that you want, we can't compete this year. We need more time. And that's a perfect conversation of having, what do you need to do to know whether you should or you shouldn't compete this year, is knowing whether you've done enough work or whether there's still some more work to be done based on the goal. Now, if the goal is a pro card or to be an overall champ, then you've got to have the least amount of gaps. If the goal is to win the 30 plus division or something else, it's like, you know what, that physique that you have is good enough to get that job done. To reach that goal, we can press play this year and we can get that done. Is there anything else that you can think of? Reasons why people, I guess the only other thing I can think of, the reason why you wouldn't do it is if you're not acting in a way, you don't have the habits required that you need in a prep.
Yeah, so that would be an underline. That obviously comes before those other things we're talking about, and that's why before you start, if you've just broken up from a marriage or something bad's happened, you've lost your job, you've got so much turbulence, contest prep is not going to save you. It can be helpful to take some of your attention away, but you shouldn't be like, this has just happened to me, so now now's the best time for me to go and do it. You need stability, you need consistency, and you need rigidity. Like ideally you would want to have an immaculate at least 6 months running into that, so that it's, again, all of our ducks are in a row. The only thing that really changes is now I'm just eating a little bit less. Everything else is exactly the same.
Yeah. Awesome.
Cool, man.
All right, we'll end it there. Thanks for the question, guys. We'll see you in the next one, hopefully with MG.